Lila had always enjoyed the quiet of her neighborhood in the evenings. The streets were calm, lined with trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and the occasional laugh of a child playing in a yard down the street reminded her that life, despite its struggles, had small joys. Her house was modest but cozy, with warm lights that glowed through the windows and a small garden that she tended to with care. Inside, everything had its place. The smell of fresh coffee lingered from the afternoon, and Max, her large, loyal dog, was resting near the couch, his ears flicking at every small sound. Max wasn't just a pet to her. He was a constant companion, a protector, and sometimes the only friend who seemed to understand the weight she carried from the world outside. Lila had faced her share of challenges, and over time, she had built a strength in herself that many in the neighborhood quietly admired. She worked long hours at a local store, often dealing with difficult customers and sometimes faced prejudice herself. Yet she never let it define her. She believed in fairness, kindness, and doing the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. Max had been with her through everything. He was always by her side, sensing her moods, comforting her when things felt heavy, and alerting her when anything unusual occurred. They had a bond that went beyond words, a silent understanding that if one needed the other, help would come instantly. That evening, like many others, Lila took Max out for a short walk. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain that had fallen earlier in the day. Max trotted beside her, sniffing the grass, his tail wagging lazily but his eyes alert, scanning the surroundings with a focus that made Lila smile. It was their routine, a small moment of peace in the chaos of life. As she walked down the street, she noticed the familiar lights in the windows of her neighbors' houses. Families eating dinner, people watching television, and sometimes a conversation between friends over the fence. It was ordinary, but in its ordinariness it felt safe. Unbeknownst to her, a group of men had been watching her house for days. They were a gang, small-time criminals with more arrogance than brains, and they had chosen Lila's house because they assumed it would be an easy target. They saw her as someone who wouldn't fight back, a woman living alone with a dog, someone they thought they could scare. They didn't know her. They didn't know Max, and most importantly, they didn't know that under Lila's calm exterior was a woman who would not allow anyone to take advantage of her or her home. Inside her house, the gang whispered among themselves, planning the break-in for that very evening. They talked about the quick score they were going to make, sneering at what they thought were weaknesses. Their language was laced with insults, and their assumptions about Lila's race and gender made them careless. They never considered the possibility that they were about to make a huge mistake. As they moved through the shadows outside, their movements were quiet but hurried, driven by their greed and arrogance. They saw the house as an object, not a home, a prize to be taken. Meanwhile, Lila and Max returned from their walk. She unlocked the door, hearing Max's nails click against the wooden floor, and the familiar smells of home greeted her. She let him drink some water and settled into her usual chair with a small book she had been reading. Max curled up near her feet, his eyes half closed but attentive, occasionally glancing toward the window. There was comfort in the routine, a sense that the world outside could not touch the safety they had created together. Lila had no idea that danger was moving closer with every passing second. The gang made their move while she was inside, thinking she had gone out for longer than she had. They forced open a window at the back, stepping quietly into the kitchen. Their confidence was almost laughable. They expected an empty house, a few valuable items, and a quick escape. They didn't hear Max at first, but as soon as he noticed the intruders, his ears perked up. He didn't bark immediately. He waited, assessing, calculating, as though he understood the situation better than they did. His body tensed, his tail stiffened, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Lila, still reading, didn't notice yet, her mind elsewhere, unaware of the looming threat. Max's growl grew louder, and the gang finally noticed him. They laughed, thinking they could intimidate him. One of them threw a small object toward him, expecting him to back off. But Max stood his ground. His eyes were fixed on the intruders, his loyalty and protectiveness clear in every movement. The gang, surprised by his courage, muttered among themselves, wondering why the dog seemed so fearless. Little did they know, Max wasn't just fearless, he was devoted to Lila, trained in instinct if not formally, and prepared to defend his home at any cost. At that moment, Lila sensed something was wrong. She looked up from her book and noticed shadows moving across the living room. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't panic. Instead, she calmly set the book aside and whispered to Max, "Go see what's happening." Max didn't need more instruction. He leapt up, barking loudly, and charged toward the intruders. The gang stumbled back, caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the dog. They shouted, trying to scare him away, but Max's loyalty to Lila was unwavering. He lunged at one of them, snapping and growling, his size and strength far exceeding what they had expected from a pet. Lila, heart racing but focused, grabbed her phone and dialed 911. She knew she needed help, but she also knew that Max would hold the intruders at bay until authorities arrived. She shouted at the gang, telling them to leave, but they were panicked now, unsure how to handle the situation. Their arrogance was crumbling, replaced by fear. Max's presence, his devotion to her, was disrupting everything they had planned. The gang made a split-second decision to flee, grabbing what they could, but Max was relentless. He chased the one who ran toward the back exit, barking ferociously, teeth bared, his growls echoing through the neighborhood. Lila followed closely, shouting for Max to stay close but knowing deep down that he was in control. The scene attracted attention. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, seeing the chaos unfold. Some called the police themselves, adding to the incoming help that would soon arrive. As the sirens grew louder in the distance, the gang realized that their mistake was monumental. They had underestimated Lila, underestimated Max, and underestimated the consequences of their arrogance. What they thought would be a simple robbery had turned into a chaotic, failed mission. Lila's calm determination, combined with Max's fearless protection, had changed the outcome entirely. The gang's plan, fueled by racism and greed, had been dismantled by loyalty and courage. By the time the police arrived, some of the gang members were caught trying to hide, and others were still running, facing Max's relentless pursuit. Lila stayed calm, giving statements and guiding officers through the scene, her focus unwavering. Max sat beside her, his head tilted slightly as if proud of the job he had done. The bond between them had never been clearer. Lila realized that her home, her life, and her safety were not defined by the assumptions of others. She and Max had faced danger together, and together they had protected what mattered most. That night, after everything had settled, Lila sat in her living room. Max curled up at her feet once more. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a deep sense of relief. She thought about how close it had come and how easily things could have gone differently. But she also thought about the lessons, how vigilance, courage, and loyalty could turn even the scariest situations around. Max nudged her hand with his nose and she smiled, running her fingers through his fur. In that quiet moment, she knew they had faced the storm together and had come out stronger. The night returned to calm, the neighborhood lights glowing softly through the windows. Lila and Max had proven, without words, that strength was not always loud, that courage could be quiet, and that devotion, whether from a person or a dog, could change the outcome of any dangerous situation. And though the world outside could be unpredictable and sometimes cruel, inside that house there was safety, loyalty, and the unwavering bond of trust. The evening had grown darker, the calm of the neighborhood now pierced by quiet but deliberate movements. Inside Lila's home, the remnants of dinner still sat on the counter, and Max prowled quietly, sensing something in the air. Lila had barely settled back into her chair after her walk when she felt the first ripple of unease. It wasn't fear. She didn't allow fear to control her, but a subtle instinct honed over years of living independently told her that someone was there who didn't belong. Max's ears twitched, his body tense, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. He wasn't just reacting to an intruder. He was alerting her to danger, and Lila immediately trusted that warning. The gang had entered the house quietly, expecting it to be empty. They tiptoed through the kitchen, moving toward the living room where Lila usually spent her evenings. They laughed quietly among themselves, mocking the supposed easy target they had chosen. Each man thought this would be a simple job, a few valuables, a quick getaway, and maybe some money in their pockets. Their underestimation of Lila and Max was complete. They did not notice the subtle signs that someone was home. They did not anticipate the loyalty and courage that lived in her dog. Max's growl grew louder as the men moved closer. He circled near the living room, keeping his body low but ready to spring into action. One of the men shone a flashlight around the room, trying to locate anything of value. The beam landed on the couch where Lila had been sitting moments ago. The men whispered, their words harsh and dismissive, filled with arrogance and ignorance. They did not know that Lila had faced danger before, that she had endured insults and prejudice in countless forms, and that she would not be intimidated. From the window, Lila watched their movements, her heart steady but alert. She could see Max's posture change, his muscles coiling like springs ready to protect. She quietly dialed 911, her fingers moving with precision, her voice calm as she explained the situation. She didn't panic because she knew Max would not allow harm to come her way. The dog had been trained by instinct and experience to act when needed, and his devotion to her was absolute. The gang finally noticed Max. They laughed, thinking that a dog could not stop them. One man stepped forward, waving his arms, trying to scare him. Max didn't flinch. He barked loudly, his teeth bared, his body moving with controlled aggression. The man stumbled back, taken aback by the intensity of the dog's loyalty. The others tried to act tough, whispering to each other that the dog was just an obstacle, nothing more. But Max was not just an obstacle. He was a force that they had completely underestimated. Lila stood silently, watching as Max lunged forward. One of the men tried to strike at him with a stick, but Max was quick, dodging and snapping in a way that made it clear he was in control. The gang panicked, realizing that the dog was not going to back down. Their plan was crumbling. They had assumed the house was defenseless, that Lila would be afraid. They had assumed Max was just a pet, harmless and loyal only in appearance. They were wrong. Every move they made was met with resistance, every step forward met with a growl, a snap, a warning. Lila moved cautiously toward the kitchen door, keeping her eyes on the men. She didn't need to confront them directly. Her presence alone, combined with Max's loyalty, was enough to unsettle them. She shouted at them to leave, her voice firm and commanding. For a moment there was silence, broken only by Max's warning growls. The men hesitated, unsure how to react to a woman who was calm, composed, and clearly in control of the situation. The tension in the room was palpable. One man tried to grab a small item from the counter, thinking it would be easy to snatch. Max lunged instantly, knocking him back with a precise motion that startled the entire gang. They were no longer confident, no longer thinking this would be an easy robbery. Fear began to seep in, replacing the arrogance they had carried so casually just minutes before. Max had turned the tables, and Lila's presence made it clear that help could arrive at any moment. The gang realized they had no choice but to leave with whatever they had already grabbed. Panic spread through them. One tried to escape through the back door, but Max intercepted him immediately. The dog's speed and determination left the man stumbling and tripping over the garden plants outside. Lila watched from the window as her dog, without hesitation, cornered him, ensuring that he could not flee easily. The scene was chaotic, but Max was precise. Every action was deliberate, every movement protective of Lila. Neighbors began to notice the commotion. A light flicked on down the street, and someone stepped outside to see what was happening. Max barked, not at the neighbors but at the intruders, creating a protective barrier around Lila's home. The gang shouted, frustrated and panicked, realizing that their easy job had turned into a nightmare. Lila's calm and Max's devotion had created an environment they could not control. Their arrogance, their assumptions based on race and gender, had completely blinded them to reality. As the first sirens wailed in the distance, the gang became desperate. They scattered, some running toward the street, others hiding near fences and behind bushes. Max chased one man relentlessly, his barking echoing through the quiet neighborhood while Lila remained inside, making sure her phone call with the police continued uninterrupted. She guided them with clear, calm instructions, her voice never rising in panic and her attention always on Max, who continued to protect her home with unwavering dedication. The police arrived just as the gang realized they were surrounded by both law enforcement and the alert neighbors. Some of the men were caught trying to hide. Others were cornered by Max's strategic blocking of exits. Lila stepped outside cautiously, keeping Max close, and watched as the authorities took control. She gave statements explaining the sequence of events, the timing, and how Max had intervened. The officers looked at her with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They had seen dogs chase intruders before, but the loyalty and intelligence Max displayed were remarkable. In the aftermath, Lila began to assess the situation calmly. Nothing in the house was damaged beyond minor scuffs and displaced items. Nothing of value had been lost and the intruders had been stopped without physical harm to anyone. Lila reflected on the evening, thinking about how quickly things could have gone wrong if she had not trusted Max or if she had panicked. The dog's devotion had turned what could have been a dangerous situation into a story of protection and loyalty. As she settled back into her living room, Max laying his head gently on her knee, Lila realized the depth of their bond. He had sensed the danger, acted without hesitation, and ensured her safety. It was more than instinct. It was a demonstration of trust, loyalty, and courage. She spoke softly to him, praising him for his actions, and in his eyes she saw understanding and pride. It was a moment of connection that reminded her why she had adopted him, why he had become not just a companion but a protector. The neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Lights were turned back on in homes, neighbors whispered about what had happened, and the police made sure the gang could no longer threaten anyone. Lila and Max remained vigilant, knowing that while the immediate danger had passed, life required constant attention. Yet in that vigilance there was comfort. They had faced a real threat together and had emerged stronger and more confident. Lila understood now that courage was not just about confrontation but about presence, awareness, and trust in those who protect you. That night, as Lila and Max sat by the window watching the stars, she reflected on the events with a calm sense of gratitude. She had faced danger without fear, relied on the bond she shared with her dog, and seen firsthand how loyalty and courage could outweigh arrogance and hatred. Max nudged her hand and she smiled, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the small but significant victory that had taken place in a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. But for Lila, Max, and even the neighbors who had witnessed pieces of the evening, it was a moment that would not be forgotten. It was a story of strength, devotion, and the importance of not underestimating anyone, especially someone who looked ordinary on the outside but carried an unshakable courage within. And Max, loyal to the very end, had proven that true devotion could turn the tide against even the most foolish intruders. The night air was cool and heavy with tension as the gang realized their plan had completely fallen apart. They had thought the house was an easy target, but Max, Lila's devoted dog, had turned their assumptions against them. One man tried to run toward the street hoping the darkness would hide him, but Max was already in motion, blocking his path. The growls and barks filled the neighborhood, sharp and commanding, a sound that announced Max's unwavering loyalty. Lila had stepped back into the living room, keeping her phone connected to the police line. She didn't panic. She had learned long ago that fear could cloud judgment, and she needed every clear thought she could muster. She watched as Max circled one of the men, keeping him cornered near the backyard fence. The man tried to wave his arms and shout at the dog, but it was useless. Max's eyes stayed locked on him, a silent warning that he would not allow anyone to harm Lila or escape without consequence. The rest of the gang was in disarray. Some tried to run through the front door, others scrambled through the side yard, and one even ducked behind a large bush, hoping to hide from both Max and the flashing lights of arriving neighbors. Their arrogance had completely blinded them to the situation. They had thought courage was physical size or weapons, but they had underestimated loyalty, vigilance, and intelligence. Max was not just a dog. He was an extension of Lila's presence, a guardian with instinct and courage that outmatched their greed. Lila spoke calmly into the phone, updating the police. "They're trying to escape through the backyard. One of them is stuck near the fence. The others are scattered but still inside the yard," she said, her voice steady. Max barked sharply, reacting to sudden movements, reminding the men that their presence was being monitored and that their escape was impossible. The police assured her that help was nearly there, and she kept her eyes on the scene, ensuring that Max was safe but also effective in protecting the house. The man trapped near the fence finally tried to push past Max, thinking brute force would work. Max met him with a warning bark and a firm stance, blocking the path completely. The man stumbled backward, nearly falling into a flower bed, his fear now evident in every gesture. He cursed and tried again, but Max stayed firm, moving precisely and protecting without causing unnecessary harm. Lila stepped closer to the back door, speaking firmly. "Stay back. You're not leaving here until the police arrive." Her calm authority surprised the man. He hadn't expected anyone to be so composed, so in control. Meanwhile, the other members of the gang ran toward the street, hoping to disappear into the darkness. Max shifted, deciding which direction to pursue first, but Lila called his name softly, signaling him to focus on the man nearest the fence. Max obeyed, his attention split between protecting Lila and ensuring that the immediate threat could not escape. It was a delicate balance, but one he had mastered through instinct and devotion. The men, now fully panicked, realized they had miscalculated in every possible way. Neighbors began to emerge, some with flashlights, some calling 911 themselves, creating a larger circle of safety around the house. Lila's calm presence reassured them, and Max's growls reminded everyone that the danger had not fully passed. One neighbor whispered to another, "That dog? He's not just protecting her, he's making sure they can't get away." It was true. Max's actions were both precise and heroic, a testament to the bond he shared with Lila and the trust she had placed in him. The man near the fence finally gave up, realizing he could not escape Max's vigilance. He sank to the ground, defeated, while Max stayed close, growling softly but not attacking, waiting for the authorities to arrive. Lila's voice was calm as she addressed him, explaining that resistance would only make things worse. The man glanced up at her, his fear and confusion evident. He had assumed she would be scared, weak, or intimidated. He had assumed her dog was harmless. Every assumption had been wrong, and the realization was hitting him now. Other members of the gang were still trying to flee, but Max shifted his attention strategically. He moved with precision, blocking one path, hurting another toward areas where they could be easily intercepted by the police. It was clear that he was not acting randomly. His movements were calculated, guided by devotion and instinct. Lila watched, impressed and grateful, understanding that Max's intelligence went beyond simple training. He was her guardian, her partner, and a force that could not be underestimated. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and the street began to light up with flashing blue and red. The gang froze, realizing the authorities were arriving faster than they had anticipated. One of them tried to run again, but Max's sudden bark made him skid to a stop, fear written all over his face. Lila's neighbor stepped out, joining the circle, creating a clear boundary that further limited the intruder's options. The gang had thought this would be a quick robbery, but the situation had transformed into a full-blown containment, orchestrated by a woman and her devoted dog. Lila kept speaking calmly, instructing the neighbors and guiding Max with subtle commands. "Stay with me, Max. Don't let them pass you. Wait for the police." Max obeyed immediately, his loyalty unwavering. The gang's desperation grew, and they began making mistakes, tripping over shrubs, knocking over trash cans, and calling attention to themselves. Every error made it easier for Max and the police to manage the situation. Lila's calm, combined with Max's precision, had created an environment where chaos worked against the intruders, not in their favor. The first officer arrived and quickly assessed the situation. Max's presence was noted immediately. The officers moved cautiously, respecting the dog's protective instincts, while Lila provided clear instructions about the locations of the remaining intruders. One by one, the gang members were identified and contained, thanks in no small part to Max's strategic positioning. Lila stayed near the back door, keeping a watchful eye on everything, ensuring that the dog remained focused and that no further chaos erupted. As the last of the gang members were detained, Lila took a moment to breathe. Max, still alert, lay at her side, his eyes scanning the area even as the situation calmed. The adrenaline that had fueled the chase and confrontation began to ebb, replaced by relief and gratitude. Lila reflected on the night's events, thinking about how quickly ordinary plans could spiral out of control when assumptions and arrogance collide with loyalty and courage. Max had not only protected her home but had actively influenced the outcome of the entire encounter. Neighbors began to gather, expressing admiration and relief. They praised Lila's calm and Max's bravery, some even snapping photos and sharing the story with others. The narrative of the night was clear. What the gang had assumed would be a simple robbery had turned into a disaster for them, all because they underestimated a woman and her dog. Lila listened to the stories, but she remained modest, insisting that Max had simply done what any loyal companion would do. In truth, the bond they shared, built over years of trust, had created a partnership that was unmatched in its effectiveness. The police documented the scene, collected statements, and ensured that the gang would face legal consequences. Lila provided detailed accounts explaining how Max had intervened, and the officers looked at her with respect and curiosity. Max, sensing the tension had lifted, finally relaxed slightly, but he stayed close, unwilling to leave Lila unprotected even in the calmer moments. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the night's events lingered. Everyone who had witnessed any part of it knew that something extraordinary had occurred. Later, as the adrenaline faded completely, Lila sat on her couch with Max curled at her feet. She reflected quietly on what had happened, considering the courage, intelligence, and loyalty that had carried them through the night. She realized that danger could strike unexpectedly, but preparedness, trust, and devotion could make all the difference. Max nuzzled her hand and she smiled, acknowledging the silent communication between them. They had faced something terrifying, and together they had come out unscathed. In the days following, Lila shared the story with neighbors, not to boast, but to highlight the importance of awareness, preparedness, and the remarkable bond between humans and their pets. Max had become more than just a family member. He had become a symbol of courage, intelligence, and loyalty in action. The gang's arrogance and ignorance had brought them to a point where they could not succeed, and it was a lesson in humility they would not forget. Even as life returned to its normal rhythm, Lila remained vigilant. She understood that danger could arise at any moment, but she also knew that courage and devotion could turn the tide. Max stayed close, not just as a pet, but as a guardian, a friend, and a reminder that loyalty was one of the strongest forces in the world. The night's events became a story she would recount for years, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of triumph, cleverness, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog. The night had settled into a quieter rhythm, though the neighborhood was still buzzing with whispers about what had happened. The sirens of police cars faded, but the impact of the events was clear. The gang that had believed they could intimidate Lila and take what they wanted had been completely outmaneuvered. It wasn't weapons or strength that had stopped them. It was courage, intelligence, and the unshakable bond between Lila and Max, her devoted dog. The police carefully guided the gang members away, ensuring each one was secured and transported. They checked the house, confirming that nothing major had been stolen or damaged. Lila stayed close, her mind alert, ensuring Max remained calm but attentive. Max's body relaxed only slightly, though his eyes remained watchful, scanning for any unexpected movement. It was as if he understood that the danger was over, but remained protective just in case. Neighbors slowly emerged from their homes. Some had peeked through windows earlier, witnessing the chaos unfold. Now curiosity and relief brought them closer. They approached cautiously, unsure of how Lila would react to the attention but wanting to offer support. She welcomed them with a calm voice, explaining what had happened without dramatizing the events. Her composure impressed everyone. It wasn't just Max who had been brave. Lila's calm, steady presence had allowed the entire situation to remain controlled until help arrived. People spoke in hushed tones, expressing disbelief that the gang had assumed they could pull off the robbery so easily. They thought it would be quick, one neighbor whispered. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. Another added, "That dog, he's incredible. I've never seen anything like it." Lila smiled softly, running her hand over Max's head. She knew he had done what he had to do, but she also recognized that the combination of trust, instinct, and loyalty had created a moment that none of them would forget. The officers asked neighbors for statements, collecting any observations that might help the investigation. They were thorough, asking about the gang's movements, how long they had been in the area, and whether anyone had noticed suspicious behavior beforehand. The neighbors were eager to help, and Lila facilitated the process, guiding them politely and ensuring everyone stayed calm. Her demeanor again was striking to the authorities. She was composed, precise, and clearly in control of the situation. As the police gathered evidence, Lila reflected quietly on the events of the night. She thought about how quickly danger could appear, and how easily assumptions could be misleading. The gang had believed that fear, prejudice, and intimidation could get them what they wanted. They had underestimated both her courage and Max's intelligence. The lesson was clear. Loyalty, courage, and vigilance could be far stronger than brute force or arrogance. Neighbors began to share their admiration openly. Some brought blankets, water, and snacks, checking on Lila and Max to make sure they were unharmed. Children peeked from behind parents' legs, eyes wide with amazement at the dog who had protected the home. Lila welcomed their presence, allowing Max to interact gently with the kids while still maintaining a watchful eye. She knew that the lessons of courage and protection extended beyond her household. They could inspire the community to remain vigilant and supportive of one another. The gang members, meanwhile, faced the reality of their mistakes. The officers were thorough in their questioning, and the intruders quickly realized that their plan had failed spectacularly. Their arrogance, fueled by ignorance and prejudice, had left them exposed and vulnerable. Lila's calm and Max's determination had ensured that no harm came to anyone in the house. But it had also created a clear message. No one could assume they could intimidate or overpower another person based on appearance or assumptions. Lila spoke quietly to the officers, explaining how the events had unfolded from her perspective. She described Max's actions, how he had blocked escape routes, chased intruders, and maintained control of the situation without causing unnecessary harm. The officers listened carefully, nodding in appreciation of the dog's instincts and Lila's calm decision-making. One officer even remarked that Max's behavior had likely prevented serious injury or worse. Lila simply smiled and patted his head, feeling proud but not boastful. The neighborhood slowly began to settle again. The remaining gang members were taken into custody, and the area was secured. Lila stayed with Max, speaking softly to him, reassuring him that the danger had passed. He responded with quiet contentment, leaning against her leg but never fully relaxing. His devotion remained, a reminder of the trust and bond that had saved the night. Lila understood that their partnership was more than companionship. It was a mutual understanding that neither would face danger alone. Conversations spread through the community about what had happened. Neighbors shared their stories, emphasizing the bravery of a woman and her dog standing up against criminals. The tale traveled quickly, and while it was a frightening night, it had also become a story of hope and inspiration. People admired not only Max's courage but also Lila's calm, strategic thinking. They saw a clear example of how vigilance, preparation, and devotion could protect lives and property. Lila began to think about the future. She knew the gang's arrest didn't end the need for caution. She considered installing additional security measures, adjusting her routines slightly, and maintaining her awareness of the neighborhood. But she also knew that fear would not guide her decisions. Max remained her steadfast protector, and together they had proven that courage and loyalty could overcome even the most reckless and dangerous intruders. The police thanked Lila for her cooperation and bravery. They reminded her that the gang would face serious consequences and that her actions had been crucial in ensuring everyone's safety. Lila nodded, feeling a quiet sense of relief. The night had been intense, but it had also demonstrated the strength of calm, strategic thinking, and the extraordinary bond between a person and their dog. Max, sensing the tension easing, finally lay down completely, resting his head on her foot. She stroked his fur, silently thanking him for his unwavering devotion. Later, as the neighborhood slowly returned to its normal rhythm, Lila sat quietly on her porch, reflecting on the lessons of the night. She thought about how easily assumptions could lead to mistakes, how courage and loyalty were far more powerful than aggression, and how a calm, clear mind could change the outcome of a dangerous situation. Max sat beside her, his eyes alert but relaxed, and she knew that together, they had faced and overcome a challenge that would be remembered in the neighborhood for a long time. Neighbors continued to check in over the next few days, bringing small gifts and expressing their admiration. Lila accepted them graciously, but she remained humble. She understood that Max had been the hero, that their teamwork had saved the night, and that the community's support was a reminder that strength often comes not from fighting alone, but from bonds of trust and cooperation. The story spread, becoming a quiet legend in the area. A woman and her dog standing together, facing danger with courage, intelligence, and devotion. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal. Lila continued her routines, going for walks with Max, tending to her home, and engaging with neighbors. The memory of the gang lingered, but it no longer carried fear. Instead, it served as a reminder of what could be achieved with calm determination and loyalty. Max remained ever watchful, but the neighborhood began to relax. knowing that the lessons of that night had strengthened their sense of community and vigilance. The night's events became a topic of conversation, not in fear, but in admiration. People recounted how a small group of criminals had underestimated the courage of a woman and the intelligence of her dog, only to be stopped by loyalty, bravery, and strategic thinking. Children learned about courage in unexpected forms. Neighbors were reminded to support one another, and Lila felt a renewed sense of confidence in her own strength. Even as life returned to its peaceful rhythm, the impact of that night endured. Lila knew that danger could come at any time, but she also knew that courage, vigilance, and devotion could overcome it. Max remained her loyal companion, a living symbol of bravery and loyalty. Together they had faced a threat head-on, and their story had inspired the community in ways they hadn't anticipated. The gang's arrest had repercussions beyond the immediate neighborhood. The authorities ensured that their actions would be addressed through the legal system, and the knowledge that their crime had failed spread among their peers. It was a lesson in humility and consequence, a reminder that no one could assume power over another based on arrogance, prejudice, or fear. Lila's calm courage and Max's loyalty had created a ripple effect, reinforcing the values of vigilance, preparation, and devotion. By the time the neighborhood fully settled, Lila and Max had returned to their routines, but with a deeper understanding of their own strength. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in a night of danger and challenge. Lila reflected on the events, realizing that courage was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was quiet, calculated, and paired with loyalty that refused to falter. Max, lying beside her, seemed to understand completely. The story of that night would remain with the neighborhood for years. People would remember how a woman and her dog had stood against danger, how assumptions had been shattered, and how loyalty, courage, and intelligence had prevailed. Lila and Max had proven that true strength could come in unexpected forms, and that even in the face of fear and aggression, calm determination and devoted companionship could create remarkable outcomes. The days after the break-in felt different to Lila. Life returned to its usual rhythm, but the experience had left a deep impression on her. Even simple tasks like walking Max down the street or watering the garden carried a quiet sense of triumph. The neighborhood seemed a little closer now, and the sense of community that had always existed quietly between neighbors became stronger. People waved more, spoke more, and checked in on one another. Lila noticed this change and felt comforted. It was as if the events of that night had reminded everyone that courage, loyalty, and vigilance mattered more than ever. Max remained alert, though he had settled into a more relaxed routine. His body language showed that he was aware of any unusual movement, but there was no tension in his muscles, no frantic energy. He had fulfilled his duty during the night of chaos, and now he could enjoy the calm with Lila. She smiled often at the way he watched over the house, proud of him and grateful for the protection he had provided. Max had been more than a dog that night. He had been a partner, a guardian, and a friend who had risked everything to protect her. Lila spent some time reflecting on what had happened. She thought about the gang, their arrogance, and the assumptions that had led them to target her. They had believed that fear, prejudice, and intimidation could make them successful, but they were wrong. What they hadn't realized was that strength didn't always show itself in aggression or power. Courage could be calm and steady, and loyalty could be fierce and unshakable. Max had demonstrated both in ways that left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. The police had followed up to ensure the gang faced proper consequences. Lila had given her full cooperation, providing detailed accounts of the events and confirming the actions of each intruder. She had also shared how Max had intervened, his bravery and intelligence preventing any harm to herself or the neighborhood. The officers were impressed, noting that it was rare to see such coordinated instinct between a human and a dog. Lila simply smiled and patted Max, acknowledging the silent understanding they shared. Neighbors continued to visit, some with small gifts, others simply to express gratitude. They wanted to show appreciation not just